podcastjuice.net.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special episode of the Prince Podcast. This is what we call the album celebration. And today we are celebrating and talking about Prince's first album, For You. And to help me do that today, I got a nice panel of experts, Prince enthusiasts, music enthusiasts, a lot of voices you've heard before. Joining me today, Mr. Big Ken. Sir, how are you?
I'm doing good. Good to be here, man.
All right, man. It's good to have you back in the podcast, man.
Well, you know, I do what I can do when I can do it.
Okay. And we got a special guest. We are doing a sort of like the if there was ever an Avengers movie tied into, and I guess I got to say this carefully because or DC and Marvel come together for extravaganza. We are joined by Mr. Arthur from the Music Snobs. Sir, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Another Prince Snobs mashup.
Yes, sir. Shout out to Jahan. Couldn't make it today. We definitely reached out to get him on. Also, shout out to Day Dropping. We may still drop into the show. We'll see. And also another special shout out to Big Sexy and Sack, who I believe will be coming up a little late. You know how our people do sometimes, but he's on his way. We're going to hold the door open for him. But with all of that said, what we're going to do today is talk about the album For You. And not necessarily a track-for-track review, but we want to just discuss the album. We want to celebrate this album. And, you know, the whole point of this whole series is to celebrate and discuss all of the albums. But what we're going to do is start at the top. And this is sometimes an album that is not played a lot or referenced as much as it needs to be. So hopefully this will be an opportunity where we can really talk about the love of this album and, you know, the quality of this first Prince album, which is to me a very intriguing album when you look at it in context of everything that he's done. All right, so Prince For You, this album was released April 7th, 1978, which I didn't even think about at the time, but that's almost, that's like 38 years ago?
Yeah.
Almost to the day, a few more days off.
Yeah.
God, that's, whew. It's a trip to me now. I think about a lot of these albums I listen to. I'm like, wow, that album came out 20 years ago. This album came out 30 years ago. It makes me feel old.
Right. I mean, recording this, we're just a day or two beyond the anniversary of Parade, 30th anniversary of Parade.
30 years ago, Parade. Doesn't that sound crazy?
That is crazy.
All right. But today For You. So, yeah, like I said, this album came out April 7th, 1978. This was Prince's first album. I believe my man was 19 years old at the time. Let that sit in for just a little bit. A 19-year-old Prince, first album, Warner Brothers, a major label deal. Real quick, and I didn't think to do this, but I'm just thinking about it. Prince's first album, For You, and I always compare these guys, but he's a contemporary somewhat guy. Say D'Angelo's first album, Brown Sugar. And you can look at both of these albums, and if you look at where they are at this point, you know, of course, D'Angelo does not have the body of work. He may have the span of time, 14 years.
Right.
But the quality of, if you went 14 years from For You to would have been that next out, 14 years out, would it be what? Love Sexy or something like that, or
92?
92, Diamonds and Pearls.
No, that's the Symbol album, 92.
Yeah, Symbol album.
Pearls,
right,
91.
Right, that's right. There's such a, this is a drastic difference to some degree of where they are at that point. Why I went there, I don't know. I was just thinking about that. But Prince's For You. So what I want to do is dial back a little bit. I think all of us were not old enough at that time to be walking into any record store, for that matter, maybe asking for a Jackson's record. That was like the big thing for me, something to deal with Michael Jackson. But aside from that, I wasn't buying albums in 1978. Probably the first album I got, which was in it's been John Williams' Star Wars, but that's another story. So I want to know when you guys first heard For You. I'm going to go to Big Ken. So what was your first introduction to the For You album?
Well, when you sent this topic out, I was thinking about it. Okay, so I was 9 years old when this album came out. Just like you, obviously, I wasn't buying records, but I was thinking to myself, I don't recall hearing any songs from this album on the radio at all. Like my first Prince song that I can remember ever hearing on the radio was "I Want to Be Your Lover," but I don't remember them ever doing anything from this album on there. So I didn't really get hip to this album until '86, because by that time I was full-fledged a member of the Purple Army. I was gone, hook, line, and sinker from that point. After Around the World in a Day and Parade, I was gone. There was no hope for me at that point. So at that point, I'm like, I need to go back and get this cat's entire catalog. And at that time, that year, we moved from the south side of Chicago to, my father moved us out to the suburbs. And I ended up going to this local mom and pop record store. And I bought the cassettes for You, Prince, Dirty Mind, Controversy. I just bought everything that I didn't have on cassette. And so that's the first time that I heard this album. It was probably sometime late in '86.
Man, you got like a power pack of music.
Oh yeah, I just grabbed them all. I mean, I grabbed everything that I didn't have, because at that point, obviously, I had Purple Rain and all the stuff after, but I didn't own the albums prior to that. And so I was just like, okay, just grab them. I just grabbed them all off the shelf and just started from the beginning, man. And I was blown away, to say the least. I mean, I'll say this: what this album represented to me when I first heard it is just, to me, it was validation, further proof of what I had come to realize by the time Around the World in a Day and Parade and all that stuff had came out, that this guy was above reproach. I mean, this guy was on another level. I mean, just hearing that initial vocal part in the beginning, where, he's establishing his vocal range, and you hear, he's establishing the falsetto. I had never heard anything like that in quote unquote popular music. And so right off the bat, it just set the tone, and it just validated everything that I already knew.
All right. Arthur, what was your first experience with the For You album?
Well, like Ken, I didn't get to that album till later. I was 7 years old. Well, actually, I was 6 years old at the time that the release happened, going on 7. But I had the benefit of having an older sister, 10 years older than me. So I had exposure to a lot of current music, just as a boy. And although I was current in 1979 with hearing the Prince album, I didn't know that For You even existed until maybe 83 or 1984, when, like so many other things, I was introduced to by girls and trying to impress them. And there was a girl in my, I think, 7th grade class whose favorite song was So Blue. And I thought that, I could impress her by already being familiar with that song, but I had never even heard of that song. So that's what led me to For You, even listening to it. And, like Ken, my first impression was twofold. I mean, one, it certainly was validation. I mean, I already been fully exposed and even had, as far as owning, Controversy, 1999, Purple Rain. So it certainly was an album that he didn't sound like an amateur, Mm-hmm. He sounded strong coming out of the gate. But it's also an album it's almost like the pilot of a really good television series, It wasn't an album that I felt that I needed to have in my collection, other than the fact that I wanted a complete, Prince collection. I mean, if we take the canonical masterpiece years, the 9 albums from 1978, to 1988, For You is in nobody's top 3, but it's probably in everybody's bottom 3, and I think just the landscape of 1978, it was a lot of artists. The record industry was certainly different at that time, where artist development was really a priority of a lot of labels. And Warner Brothers really worked hard on their stable of musicians, and they had good people in the R&B department. If you think about it like this, April 8th was the release date of Prince's For You, right? But April 20th of 1978 was the debut of Rick James and Come Get It, right? For You had absolutely nothing on it that was going to deal with you and I. For You doesn't have anything on it that can deal with Mary Jane. You know what I mean?
Right.
And also in that year, that's One Nation Under a Groove from Funkadelic. You know, so you had really hardcore funk anthems on the radio. So it's like no surprise that none of us ever heard Soft and Wet, which was probably the only song that was pushed to black radio. So in my personal book, of course, For You is the left end, of my 9 album, really 10 album, because I filed the Black Album in between Sign of the Times and Love Sexy, like everybody's really supposed to do. But for sake of conversation, just in those 9 albums, of course I have it. I listen to it far more often now than I did then, because it is a good album, and I think that it's an album that every Prince fan and every music collector should have. But it's never my first recommendation, and it's never my 5th recommendation. But I think that from an age standpoint, it's aged well, but it does sound very dated. And closing it off, I think it's because he's lived with a lot of this music, for years, and for at least 3 years. I think he was starting recording with Peppy Willie in like as early as 1975. And you can kind of tell that some of the songs, particularly a song like Just As Long As We're Together, where he's got this vocal part in the beginning, with the harmonies in the chorus, and then there's this clear percussion break, and then he goes into this extended jam that lasts about 3 to 4 minutes, and it's like that jam is very clearly something that he's been working on. When like the bootleg 77 Loring sessions, the songs that he recorded with Owen Hensey, and recorded with Andre and Bobby Z, so he's got these songs that he's working out, some of which he probably arranged lyrics, wrote lyrics too, because they really didn't have song titles, but as good as the album is, and as much as I do like it, the real story of Prince, to me, begins with Prince in 1979.
All right. Well, I wanted to go back to one of the things you touched on, sort of the climate of what was going on, and you mentioned Rick James. I was looking at some of the top albums of that time frame in '78. I believe, like the number 1 album on April 8th. No, I don't know what day that falls on, but it was Bootsy. Bootsy's player of the year was like 3 weeks at number 1. Before that, the Bee Gees' Saturday Night Fever. Going back to '77, sort of the period of where they're recording this record. I think it's all about Songs in the Key of Life was obviously huge. Rufus, Shaka Khan, All in All with Earth, Wind and Fire. Was I guess a beast chart.
Oh yeah, and I mean September was released that year.
Yeah. So there's a lot of. Go ahead.
And got to Get You Into My Life, which were heavy black radio plays. I may be a little off on my years with September. That might be 1979, but I know they Got to Get You Into My Life was hardcore '78 and number 1 on black radio. Yeah. So it's like he released this album, came out in the midst. It's almost like the album came out in the midst of other Warner Brother releases, so that it could, they could bundle For You in with radio play, because like the Player of the Year, that was a Warner Brothers release.
Right.
Bootsy was a Warner Brothers black artist.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it was a ton of just the quality of the music that was being released at that time we look at those as classic releases, a lot of these pieces of work, and this is the environment that he has to come out in, right? Where, so yeah, as you said, you have to be on a certain level. You're not gonna get no play. It didn't even matter. Like, this isn't like today where they can just throw some money at it and put you right on the front, and the shit could be whack, but we paid for that spot. Back then, you was either the shit, or we didn't hear nothing about you. It was you just a regional sort of thing, and even if that was going to pop. So I mean, this is Prince coming off in that era. But going back to, like, sort of, for me, I'm the same way. I did not know Prince existed back then. I believe I got this album for the first time. It might have been like right after Cherry Moon came out, on Parade, and I was just so like thirsty for more Prince stuff, more than what they were releasing at the time, and it got into my head that, oh yeah, because we used to go to Tower Records every Friday and just look through the aisles and stuff. It's like, well, he's got all these other tapes sitting here, and it was kind of like, well, what do you want to start with first? Because I, not knowing what to expect, I was so enamored with Purple Rain and Around the World and all that. So I'm like, okay. And I think the first one I got actually was Controversy, but I think I got For You last of all the old ones. And just, it's probably more so the cover for me.
Yeah, because he had the afro. You already knew what was
I was like,
on.
okay, this is so far removed from what I envision him of today. But I'm like, that's him. And it looked like an old type of, I was like, okay, let me check this out. I remember getting it, and I remember putting it on. I was just like, wow, this is Prince, but it sounded, I don't know the words to say, it sounded like a very standard R&B, but it sounded very good. I was like, wow, I didn't know he played it straight. You know what I mean? It's like he was playing it straight, because I'm so used to this wild presentation of Prince. I was like, wow, this is very interesting. And you can hear,
it's like it's unremarkable.
Yeah, but the thing is, you could hear the little glimpses of what I know of him at that particular time. Like, oh, okay, here's a little guitar stuff and soft and
That's
wet.
what I was saying earlier. That's what I was saying earlier. You could hear the seeds of what we came to know of Prince, but I wouldn't say it was unremarkable. I just thought it might have been more calculated. Like, you could tell, at least to me, it seemed like you could tell that this guy was very aware that this was his debut album, and so he wanted to put a range of songs in there and not play to one particular style. Okay, he could have easily just did an album full of funk type stuff if he wanted to, but it seems like he showcased his vocal range, he showcased the ballads, he showcased the instrumentalism. It was very polished. That's the word that I use. Is very polished for a first time artist, right? That's the thing that struck me. For someone to be 19 and this is his first debut album, it's a very polished sound. It's not perfect, but it's very polished. But I think it was calculated. To a degree.
I would agree with that. I would even go so far to say that Warner Brothers wasn't sure how to market Prince.
Well, remember, they wanted Maurice Wright to produce his stuff, right? Remember, he had to fight to get that, right? So they probably weren't sure. Yeah.
And even if you look at some of the promotional materials, like the inner sleeve, first of all, Prince's 2 albums, he didn't wear any clothes, right? The inner sleeve in For You, had the composition. The 3 photographs of him with this acoustic guitar, on a bed naked, right?
With the perm. Don't forget the perm.
Parted down the middle, right?
Which is very telling, right? Early on, he's letting you know, this is what I'm about.
It's buck wild, about to happen. Right. But the promo shots were him, with the neat afro, the trim mustache, with the leather jacket without the shirt, but the leather jacket with the chain and everything. It was bare. It was like he was a member of Switch. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was singing with Bobby DeBarge, because they didn't, and it's sort of like they didn't really know. Like, this is the photo that we're going to send to Right On Magazine. You know what I mean? Right. And this freak shot, we'll just go ahead and just slide this into the album itself, so that nobody really can, see that, till we can kind of figure out what we're going to do with this kid. But I agree with Ken. I think it was an album that, between Prince's management, Huntsy, and Warner Brothers brass to say that, okay, let's create an album that we can go in more than one direction in. We can either go kind of the funk route, the Bootsy crowd, the Larry, the Graham Central Station crowd, right? The disco crowd, because disco was still, this was like a year before disco started feeling the backlash. Donna Summer's On the Radio was not on the radio, I'm sorry, but Last Dance was a non-album. I think it was appeared on the soundtrack for the movie Thank God It's Friday. So I mean, it was a very disco climate that was happening there. Nobody's even brought up Barry White yet, who was still kind of that, that smooth early 70s, gruff, heavy baritone sound. Teddy Pendergrass, that was the year with Only You and Life is a Song Worth Singing album that was coming out. So there was a really telling time in black music between this 20s going into 30 somethings and teens going into 20s meld, where that same kind of music catered to both audiences was being heard on mainstream black radio. And so Prince just needed an album that he can kind of be in the room and be in the conversation. And I think that other recording artists knew early on that this kid was going to be the real thing, but he'd be the real thing, an album or two later, which Prince actually did show and prove that he was the next thing in 1979.
Yeah, I think this album is like, it's kind of like you say, it's so much of the time, and it wasn't, I don't know how much of it was actually Prince. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't have the identity to it. It was like, oh, okay. It's just like when I listen to it musically, I sometimes, to me, this production is somewhat superior than some of the later stuff, and just in terms of how it's recorded and all of the parts and everything. I mean, some of these songs are extremely lush. Some strings.
My Love Is Forever is perfect, man. My Love Is Forever is perfect.
The quality of it is amazing. The vocals on this is what I really love this album for. His harmonies and everything he's doing are some of the best he's done to me, just the way you can actually hear everything that's going on. Somebody brought up DeBarge earlier. It's funny. I think of this album when I listen to some of L's 80s stuff. Mm-hmm. I could see these songs sitting side to side. They remind me, like, oh, this is the same kind of stuff to me. Like the falsetto. I really like some of these love songs. They sit in that same sort of, when I play them, like you said, Love Is Forever, Baby. I'm like, man, I love these songs, the way he's doing these. When I play these to people that don't know it's Prince, they're like, who is this? They know it's an old song, but it's like, this is good. I'm like, this is Prince. Like, I've never heard this before. Like, when did he do this kind of stuff?
Yeah,
I'm like, this is the first, when he first.
But
go ahead.
Yeah. Now, I remember he would say that falsetto, it was easier for him to sing in falsetto because it was, easier on his voice. But I do think that it was well, I don't know. It's a little ambitious of me to be like, this was a strategy, But the only other that I can remember, the only other famous falsetto singer was Philip Bailey. Like, people really weren't singing in falsetto in the late 70s, right? Am I wrong about that? I mean, I'm thinking about Gary Scheider, who sang with Parliament and Bootsy, but that was falsetto, but that really wasn't like Philip Bailey falsetto. Right. You know what I'm saying? That wasn't Prince falsetto.
There wasn't too many of them.
I was reading up a little bit on, what was I reading? Dance Music, Sex Romance. Definitely check that book out. And there's a part in there, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the engineer, but he was like, he would walk in there on the vocal sessions, and he was saying Prince was extensively listening to Rufus featuring Shaka Khan, and he was doing the harmonies. He wanted to do the harmonies like what he was hearing there, and he kept asking, so why are you listening to this? And he's, well, I want to know my competition. And it was also interesting during this, he actually met Shaka Khan during the making of this album for the first time. She came to the studio. I guess he played a trick on her, pretending like he was Sly Stone or something on the phone. And she came in there and she ended up cussing him out, but then sat down and started listening to what he was doing. I was like, okay. So this is interesting. He met Shaka Khan, his first album. Of course, they go on to have a long history together. He meets Santana. During this as well, right? Which obviously, big influence. And he also met Sly Stone in the studio during this album. I think Sly was either at the same studio or the record plant or something. They had him come over, and he just shook his hand. You know, they said Prince is in there playing keyboards, and Sly just came in. He said Sly had an attitude or something. He's, hey, how you doing? And walked out. But I was just like, to see that he got to meet like at least the three of these people that are very influential to him during the first record. So I was just like, wow, in 19, you get to meet the guys that you probably like, okay, yeah, I'm trying to do a little bit of what they got going on. So it's interesting that he got to meet some of the greats during his sort of coming into the game a little bit. What I wanted to ask you. Oh, what do you guys think of the production of the album? We talked a little bit about it, but in terms of where he goes later, production-wise, what did you think about this first album, 19 years old? You know, some people say Andre Simone had a hand in some of these tracks. Patrice Rushen played on a few things as well. What do you guys think about the production of the album? Start with Ken.
Well, like I said before, man, it's very polished. It's very well organized, and it sounds nice too. I always thought too, man, like I think you had touched on it earlier, that there were so many vocal parts in there in terms of the harmonies and layered harmonies and stuff that, you know, didn't carry over as much in subsequent records. I mean, he does it from time to time. He did it from time to time, but I'm saying this album is filled with them. And that always stood out to me, and it made me kind of wonder why it didn't go as farther into the later albums as well. But in any case, I mean, you know, it's mixed pretty well. I mean, considering the time frame, it's not real high volume like it is nowadays. I mean, but then again, you know, most of Prince's records, as we all know, especially throughout the 80s, weren't mixed the greatest in terms of volume and stuff either. But overall, I mean, it was a quality production. Again, for him to be only 19 and basically be running the whole show, to me, that speaks volumes, and that more or less just set the tone for what we would come to expect and know of him in the future.
What did you think, Arthur, about, you know, the production and the songs? And again, there's various different styles, you know, on this record. You know, it ends with sort of like, you know, the dawning of sort of what's to come, possibly with some of the rock. Was it I'm Yours? So it kind of gives you an idea. Well, there's a little more to this cat than just, you know, this R&B heavy sort of record thing. So what were your thoughts on the music?
I know he liked reverb a lot then, and I think that kind of attributes to the dated, you know, sound, and my feeling that this was like a real, you know, showcase record. I actually like the sequencing a lot on this.
Okay.
To open with the acapella, and to close with the electric guitar, which shows off his influence, his Carlos Santana influence that he has on his guitar playing. I also think that him doing both Crazy You and So Blue, which are both kind of acoustic guitar featured songs, you know, one per side of the album, was a nice touch to kind of break up the jam oriented, and because the only real ballad is, I mean, granted, So Blue is a ballad, but I mean, like, the only real ballad would be like Baby, right? And to give you something that is still ballad type, but not like Always and Forever, or, you know, your traditional at the disco slow dance song, was a really nice touch for him to still, even though it was kind of a feature record, showcase record, still gave him a bit of uniqueness that, like Kenneth said, you know, was very telling about the things that were to come when he would, you know, do songs that are a little more, you could tell like it's just by himself, and a little more thoughtful in his approach. Like, what? Give me an example, Arthur. Like 1985 on the Around the World in a Day for Condition of the Heart. You know, yeah, it's a ballad, but it ain't like your traditional, you know, ballad. It's a very, this is me, this is what I'm on, and nobody else can do it this way, and get away with it, you know, kind of a song. But and I don't mean this, I was thinking about this topic and thinking about this album. It was sort of like I didn't want to come off, casting shade on it, because I don't think it's a shade-worthy album by any stretch, but it is a challenge to come up with unique things to say about For You, outside of the context of, what's to come, what's forthcoming, and I just think that if this was his only album, like this was his first shot, he didn't have a multi-album deal with Warner Brothers, it was like one album with an option, I don't know if he'd pick up that option with For You. I really don't, because it's like this. It's like if For You was Prince's only album, maybe he'd have another chance or another shot, a few years later, because For You definitely would get him hired as a session musician, right? Like Prince would have a lucrative career as a session artist in the late 70s going into the 80s, without doubt. But, a one and done, For You is not that. It's not that album, and I think that's okay, because again, when you look at a career like Prince has had, and you see how he started, it's really a great example and exercise for up and coming artists today to show how the importance of evolution, label support goes to building a career.
Yeah.
It's a great foundational, let's build a career artist because there's longevity here.
Well, when you look at it in the context of that, it's interesting to look at it that way, because of today that sort of progression or the chance to mature is not there, right? You have to throw everything at that first album, that first single. Soft and Wet would have had to be the jam, blow out the doors for a label of that magnitude to commit, commit long term. But back then, that was the norm. Like, okay, you give the guy 3 or whatever it was, but it wasn't, oh, this album didn't work, we're going to drop you. No, we're going to go for it. But I think, too, the other point is, to Prince's thing is, I think Warner Brothers, they knew that this guy was special too, though. It's like,
I agree.
This is not just some, hit in the pan guy. This guy can be the next thing, right? Like, he's obviously a special case, which is why you let, the 19-year-old kid from Minneapolis produce the record for the most part, right?
And they fought hard for that. Yeah, they fought hard for that.
So I think, on one hand, they understand that even if out the gate this didn't do probably what we thought, this is an investment. He's worth the time to let him do his thing. And I think, and Prince quickly, jumping ahead just a second, but he quickly realizes, okay, next record, I ain't messing around. Let me drop a bomb on him. I want to be a lover, drop a classic. So let it be known that, I can do this, But For You is the modern equivalent of the mixtape, right? In R&B, right? So Childish Gambino had Camp, right? Frank Ocean had Nostalgia Ultra, right? Right. This For You is Prince's Nostalgia Ultra. And you know what I'm saying? So it's like there's nothing wrong with that. It's really more of a cast on what's wrong with the recording industry today and the problems that they have. Because there's almost no room for artist development. Artists have to do it all themselves and then walk to the record label with the complete package, or figure out a way to bypass the label system at all. Right. It's almost like you have to go from For You to For You to Dirty Mind on your own over the internet at this point, right?
Thank you. Right.
And then the label is going to open their eye and say, okay, let's do Controversy or 1999. You know what I mean? But you had already then had to have figured it out. Real quick, any favorite tracks? I can say right off the gate, for me, probably my 2 favorite tracks are Crazy You, which is an amazing song to me. Like, I remember the first time I heard that was the song where I was like, rewind the tape. Because one is too damn short. It's like, Prince, you keep doing. But blown away by the song. I still am by that song. And the other is My Love Is Forever. I love all of that. I love the little keyboard stuff in there. I just everything about it. And to jump into sort of the bootleg thing for a quick second, there's another version of that song, like a alternate mix or something, where I think the drums are even more prominent or whatever. Beautiful, beautiful record. I was sitting here thinking about it. I was like, in a bizarro world, what would that have sounded like if I heard my man MJ sing that? That could have been like on Off the Wall or something to me. But those are my two favorite songs on the album. Big Ken, you got any favorites from this record?
Well, yeah, I told you earlier, My Love Is Forever is perfect to me.
Yeah.
That's still one of his best songs in my opinion. I also like In Love, the second cut. Baby is a beautiful ballad. That's very, very well done. So yeah, I mean it's a few nice cuts on here. I mean again for him to be 19 and to come up with that, first album, he did his thing on it. It's not heavyweight stuff like Arthur said that's going to compete with Rick James and all that stuff and Bootsy at that time, but it's still quality material for a debut.
Yeah, and real quick before I go to your faves, again, it just speaks to the groundwork and the foundation that was laid in Minneapolis with, Prince, Andre, there's Chaz, I think his name, Morris. I mean, those cats is doing the learning and actually playing these instruments without the deal, just in their hometown gigging to the point where he can slide into this at 19. Obviously, Prince is an exceptional musician at this point, and you brought up a very good point. That recording with was it David Bobby Z? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I was playing it at work the other day. I was playing that, and one of my coworkers, he was like, "What is this? Is this what do you say, like Spiral Gyro or something?" I was like, "Man, this is some Prince." He was like, "I don't believe you." I'm like, "Dude, this is before he even had a deal." Like, it's like the dude's a bad musician. I'm like, you sort of forget that he was an exceptional musician at such a young age, and this album proves that. Like, even though it's not on a level of Earth, Wind and Fire or whatever, but in terms of the musicianship, it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous that it's that polished at such a young age. But with that said, Arthur, any standout songs on this album for me?
Yeah, nothing that you all haven't said. I mean, I think "Love Is Forever" is probably hands down the best song on that album. I really do like "In Love" and "Crazy You." I'm with you, Mike. It was like, yeah, it's too short. Let's play this again and again and again and again. But "Baby," the interesting thing about "Baby" is that for me is that it's weird. It's like I think some of the best music that Prince had in the 80s from a theme standpoint is when he's the one that's dissed. He's the one that got left. He's the one that, he was the coulda, woulda, shoulda choice and everything. And Baby's the one where he's like really, really vulnerable, his girlfriend's expecting. He's not going to run from that responsibility. He doesn't have a clear answer of how they're going to make it, but they're going to do it, and they're going to do it together. You don't get that in a Prince song until like years later, mid 90s when he's about to marry Maite, let's have a baby. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that's kind of like that one and done, really unique voice that shows just kind of his willingness to be vulnerable without being the martyr, because he's got a lot of martyr songs. Something in the Waters, like a textbook Prince martyr song, But speaking of "Baby," I was going to ask you, Mike. You had the opportunity to go see the initial Paisley Park piano and microphone shows. The first show, he did do "Baby." Were you at that first show?
No, I was not at the first show.
Were you mad?
I was very mad. I mean, I was mad because he seemed to go chronologically through his story, so I did want to witness that, but I didn't catch that part.
And I mean, for him to, it's like for him to kind of pull that out, that was like a perfect piano and a microphone show. It's, a song that he never would do any other kind of way in any other kind of format, and he picks that one song out of any other song that he's gotten for you, as an album of songs that he's never played before. He plays that one song that night. I'll bet you that one time, because when I was in Oakland, he wouldn't, he didn't pull out Baby. He didn't pull out nothing close to that.
With that said, we got Big Sexy. Are you in the house, sir?
Yes, gentlemen, I apologize. There was an issue with AT&T, and believe me, Monday morning, someone is fired.
All right, that's all good. So we were
not for that guy.
Oh,
He's
no.
fired.
We're sort of wrapping up here, but I did want to ask you, of course, we're talking about Prince's For You. What was your first time or your first opportunity that you listened to the album? When were you introduced to it?
Well, as an album, the first time I listened to it was back in '85, after the Purple Rain hysteria, and I had to backfill my Prince catalog. And so I picked up a copy up at Leopold's Records in Berkeley. And
shout out to Leopold's.
Definitely. And, from there I got turned on to it. And it was cool because I know we're wrapping up, but a couple of songs on there I used to put on my original Big Sexy mixtape. So, yeah, I would put, not Baby, but So Blue and Crazy You on those old mixtapes back in the day. Oh, yeah, they did work.
All right. Yeah. Like I said, definitely an album that's worth checking out. It's the first of obviously many, and we all got to start somewhere. And I would pay money to see him do a full-on show of this album. I think the songs on there are excellent. It'd be interesting to see his interpretation of these songs now. It's funny, visually, he seems to be reverting back to the look of the For You days, with the afro and everything. So, again, I just really wanted to celebrate the first album. The other part of this, too, is that it was an interesting deal for him to get signed at that age and to get the kind of deal that he got being relatively unknown. Just sort of a huge deal when you think about it. Obviously, Warner Brothers signed, one of their biggest stars. He ended up becoming... He became Prince, right? He became the Prince, the royal badness. I was thinking the other day, like, it'd be a chance to look back at the different eras, and I was like, the first era, he was just like the Prince kind of R&B dude, and then he becomes Rude Boy, then he becomes like the royal badness, and I was like, after that, to me, he just becomes like that skinny motherfucker, like and he becomes this whole funky, like, alien funk dude, or just on some other stuff. But it's interesting to look at how he progresses, and so we took the opportunity to look at the first album, For You. We would love to hear what you think about the album. When was the last time? Here's the assignment in the comment section, whether it's on the website or on Facebook. Let us know when you first heard of this album, when you first bought it. What year was it? What did you think compared to, if you're a fan of Purple Rain or Under the Cherry Moon or whatever? What did you think of this album? With that said, go around the room quickly. Gentlemen, where they can find you online, starting with our guest author. Where can they find you?
We are online at themusicsnobs.com, where you'll find our entire show library streaming. And we've been threatening to remaster the 2 Prince episodes that were quickly snatched and shut down by MPG Music sometime this year, because we just don't care anymore if he gets mad at us. But yes, themusicsnobs.com is the website, and we are on Twitter at Total Music Snobs. And last thing, there's a vinyl reissue series that's about to start, and it's going to start with the album that we're talking about, For You. My understanding is that it's going to be released on the 26th of this month. So if you're a vinyl head and you've never heard For You, or you can't get a full copy with all of the artwork, I'm imagining they're going to do a really nice release treatment of all of these records. But it's important for this one to start the series off.
That's what's up. Definitely check out the Music Snobs. Thank you, Arthur, for coming by.
Oh, thank you, man. I always appreciate the invitations, and try to bring something of value to the show when I'm with you all.
Oh man, I appreciate it. Big Ken, sir, where can they find you online?
They can hit me up on Twitter at Ken Mitch, and then at theflavorfoundation.com, and that's where I'll be.
All right, and shout out to Big Sexy. He came in, did his thing, and he's out. So we shout him out, and shout out to you, the listener. Thank you for supporting us and continue to listen. Again, you can find me at podcastjuice.net. That is the website. Also on iTunes, just look up Podcast Juice or the Prince Podcast, and Stitcher Radio. Just look up podcastjuice.net. With that, work it like a job. We'll see you next time. Peace.